here I just wanted to start with something very, very historical. And hence in here, we have a couple of images of Queen Victoria. So for the public art, it is always very important that we start with the idea of accessibility. Yeah. Now let's see if it works. Yes, accessibility, ownership, and location. So how can we approach the artwork? Can we see it easily? Is it in a public space that we don't have to buy a ticket in order to get into it? Who actually owns the space and owns the artwork? And what kind of location it has in relation to the urban environment around it? So with these perspectives, we can start understanding the relationship between the artwork, the audience, and the city. So of course, in several ways, like Queen Victoria here indicates, public art is usually made to indicate authority. And of course, this is a very complicated question because, as we all know, there was a lot of misjustices caused by colonialism in different parts of the world. And of course, Queen Victoria is one of these symbols, the old symbols of colonialism still existing, for example, in Hong Kong. So the original statue unveiled in Hong Kong in 1896 already is still there, but it has had quite a journey. So first of all, it was made by an Italian artist in UK. Then it actually traveled to Hong Kong and it was unveiled in 1896. So the statue in itself is made out of bronze, as we can see in the upper image, very much resembling the Queen Victoria herself in a life-size format. But it was placed into this kind of marble building so that it becomes a bit of massive construction in a park. And for example, in order to celebrate King George coronation, it was lit with these beautiful lights. So there is interaction between the public artworks and the people, even during these historical times. So this is one aspect which is very interesting. How do we approach and interact with these statues and sculptures? So, however, Queen Victoria didn't always stay in Hong Kong. During the Second World War, during the Japanese occupation, Japanese armies actually collected bronze statues all around the world where they were occupying the space and transported them into Japan in order to be melted down and support the war efforts. Luckily, Queen Victoria was found in Japan in 1946 and shipped back to Hong Kong. So she's been traveling quite a lot. And in that way, she really tells us about the history and how it has been changing even across in Asia. This one statue alone. So besides that, they tell about the authorities, of course, and the power relations. These statues are often made in order to commemorate as monuments and memorials. Especially after the Second World War, we have a lot of monuments and memorials coming up all around in Asia because people need a site where they can gather and remember what was happening. And there's a lot of monuments and memorials relating to your Indonesian history in Jakarta also, as I'm sure you already know. And of course, quite a few of these are made to honor the local important people, the poets, the artists, the people who made big changes in the society, etc. So in several ways, this kind of traditional public art and the study of it reveals a lot about the local and international histories if we just be a little bit curious and patient to look into these stories of individual statues and how they travel. besides that, they of course display the changing ideologies and power relations around us. They tell a lot about the society and how it has been changing. And also because they do elucidate the social and cultural values what we have and what is happening around us. So this is perhaps not surprising to anyone working on arts, but many of these traditional public artworks are actually depicting men. And it's a big question all around the world, especially now, that a lot of the bronze statues are white men, usually on horses. So where's the colored people? Where's the minorities? Where's the women? Where's the children? So what do we represent in the public space through public art really tells about the society. And hence, I think it's very interesting topic for anyone to touch upon, at least once in a while. So of course, as said, I'm not a specialist in Indonesian art, but I just wanted to point out that if we want to look into the public art in Jakarta, so here I listed 4 of the kind of most famous public artworks that you have in Jakarta: the National Monument, the Selamat Datang Monument, the Heroes Monument, and the Proclamation Monument. So if you want to look into the Indonesian history and how especially the gaining of the independence from the Dutch colonial period was depicted, these 4 monuments tell you a lot already. And in several ways, of course, the first president, Sukarno, has been very influential. So he's been kind of involved in all of these monuments, how they are built, how they are designed, where they are, and who got to do them. So a lot of these ideas of how your national narrative is built comes from Sukarno from the 50s and 60s. And he was very much influenced by his visit to Moscow in the late 1950s, where he saw a lot of public art and very socialist realist art depicting people and especially the heroes of people. And that's why he is claimed to be inspired to do a certain kind of artworks in Jakarta. So for example, the Heroes Monument here on the left actually depicts a peasant man wearing a hat and having a rifle on his shoulder. And then we have, I wonder if you see my pointer here, and then we have a female figure offering him a bowl of rice. So all this visuality in this statue kind of emphasizes the heroism of this male figure, a peasant who is ready to fight for his country, and how women are willing to support these efforts. And it is claimed that this idea was really from kind of initiated by President Sukarno when he visited in Moscow. And this famous statue is actually made by 2 Russian sculptors, Matvel and Otto Manizer, and it's a gift from Soviet Union to Indonesia. So in here too, we have these international interactions going on and telling us what kind of political interrelations the different countries had at that time. And so, as said, this kind of visual aesthetics is, of course, utterly important. Like in here, we can see that the 2 male figures in here, both Sukarno and Hatta, are larger than life-size statues in order to make them more influential in that. But in here, I also wanted you to already also pay attention how people behave around this statue. So for example, we have a group of people taking a photo, of course, so that the monument is behind them. So besides these visual aesthetics, to look into the behavior of the people around these monuments is highly important in public art research. So just briefly to touch upon the international art history. So there's a lot of new roles of public art being coming up, especially in the 20th century. So because of the circumstances in the 1920s and especially 1930s in the US, art was used to revitalize local and national economy. And it's done again in the US this year. So the governments are actually hiring artists to do artworks so that there would be a bit of a better atmosphere in the cities and in the nation to feel that things are getting better. So especially in the 30s, a lot of murals were commissioned to be done during this New Deal period. And this directly contributes to the beautification of the neighborhoods and the cities so that they don't look so bad and depressing, but they have lovely artworks in the public buildings and in the outside of them to make people feel better. And this kind of beautification of cities is just getting stronger and stronger. And especially in the 1990s, there's a lot of pressure to the cities to build this kind of international image of the city. So it has to be vibrant, lively, nice to live in. And that is often done with arts. And in many occasions, for example, in Asian cities, a lot of international artists are commissioned to do artworks, and a lot of expensive sculptures by famous international artists are ordered to be built in the Asian cities because the governments think that it gives a better image to the city. So of course, this causes a lot of problems. Who can get to do the art and what kind of art you have in your cities? And this trend from the 1990s is still growing and growing now in the 21st century. And this is ever more pertinent because now the cities also want to engage with enhancing the tourism and promoting different perspectives of heritage. And they have found street art very useful and alluring way to do this. So for example, in Penang, in Malaysia, an Ernest Zakrovich is quite famous street artist, and he made several different kind of murals for this Georgetown festival in order to get people to come in and celebrate and make the part of the city more beautiful. So for example, this image is a very, very famous one. He placed a real bike leaning against the wall and depicted two kids riding on the bike. So you can see the patch over here. It's caused by the people because there's always dozens and dozens of people queuing in order to sit here with the kids and have their photo taken for Instagram. So the city officials have realized that this kind of interactive street art is a very good way to promote the cities. And that's why they are hiring street artists to do these interventions more and more. Also, actually in Indonesia. So these examples that I have talked so far are usually top-down policies, top-down ways of creating art in the cities. And this is what is usually understood as a public art. The local government or the national government or the leading municipals decide what kind of art is good for the people, and then they commission and put that into the city space. So this is one way of doing art. This is what has been very usual and common around the world. Top-down policies regarding the art. But there's a bit of different take. So there's also bottom-up trend in public art. So besides of the top-down, there is a bottom-up way to approach the public art. And hence, it kind of goes beyond the original idea of public art. And this trend is emerging, especially in the 60s and 70s, because there's a new kind of art forms developing, especially in the US and Europe. And artists are very keen to experiment doing art outside of the galleries and the museums. So they go into the nature, they go into the city, and they start doing things that they've never done before, like cultivating a field of wheat in Manhattan. So this kind of experimental works happened in the 60s and 70s, and in the 1980s, even more so, when artists started to become more and more confident to do these interventions without a permission. They wanted to change the whole idea of art at that time. And this new trend, the inspiration from the artist, led Suzanne Lacy to coin the concept of new genre public art. So this is very famous in art historical research, new genre public art, which is based on engagement with diversified audiences about issues directly relevant to their lives. So for them, especially for Suzanne and her colleagues, art is supposed to be something that connects us as human beings and directly gives us something, some kind of tools to talk about and manage the changes in our lives, the challenges what we are facing. So even today, these underlying key issues, the key questions we could and should ask is what constitutes publicness in cities? Who gets to decide what kind of art is valuable or meaningful to the citizens? So is it only the government who gets to decide what kind of artwork is put into the park? Or could you have a local voting? Could the people actually tell the government what kind of artwork they want to have? Could the people do the artwork themselves, etc.? So as just one example of this current situation and how complicated it can be, I want to briefly talk about the Micro Galleries Street Art Festival. So here we already have a couple of images about a mosaic workshop where a couple of artists were just interacting with the children in order to teach them to build a bit of mosaic patterns in the alley where they are living. So the Micro Galleries Street Art Festival happened in 2017 in Jakarta. I was there for a week to follow up and take photos, etc. So it's one alley, about 500 meters long alley, and it had several different interventions, workshops happening at the same time. It's called Jalan Gebon Nanas 1 was the name of the alley. I don't think you can see it from the map. I'm sorry about that. So it had about 50 artist collectives and art initiatives from 20 different countries. 36 of them were on site when about 15 were not on site at all. They just sent in the artworks and the other people put them up. So it's a huge event, a very complex event, very transcultural event. So of course, not everything goes as planned. So there were problems and issues, quite a few of them. So there was a lot of workshops and collaborations, and it was supported by both local and international companies and initiatives, etc., etc. So it gets very transcultural also in terms of the agency and supporting groups. And this kind of tendencies are very important when we talk about public art today. Who gets to do what? Who gets the funding? Who manages to pull through these projects? So just as a couple of examples, there were a lot of planned and unexpected forms of participations in this street art festival. So for example, in here in upper corner, there was Woman on Walls. So a specific wall was reserved for women only. And of course, girls, women and girls, to paint on that wall. So one female artist kind of designed the pattern and what's going to be painted, and then all the women who were interested were invited to be involved, and they were taught how to paint it. They were keen to do that. One of the local artists set up this portrait proof. So in order to get your portrait drawn by the artist, you had to contribute a children's book. So, and these children's books were gathered into a small library that would be then available for these kids in these two villages that were on this alley. So that kind of contribution and participation and exchange through art and so on. But of course, there are always unexpected participation too. So unfortunately, a huge bucket of paint fell over and we couldn't clean it up. It was just running through the alley. So what was absolutely beautiful was that the women living in the nearby houses, they just came out. They took the brushes and pencils and they started to paint the wall. No one told them to. They just came and started to do that. And after that, they actually got their own household utensils and they started to painting on those too. So this kind of inspiration of painting and doing art was just organically happening during this festival too. So no one told them to do that, no one asked them to do it, but they were keen to start experimenting with painting themselves. So these kind of interventions can happen in these new forms of public art interventions. So the whole scene of public art is getting very, very multi-sided, and there are a lot of different things happening around you in Jakarta every single day. There are dozens of projects going on. And hence, in the academic sense, the definition of public art is getting very difficult these days. So as I said in the beginning, it's usually understood something happening in public space. That's the core idea of it. But nowadays, while a definite single sentence definition of public art may never be attainable, there are recognized directions with public art practice that serve to define the field. So this is just a suggestion, a working definition, that a public art is arts outside of museums and galleries and must fit within at least one of the following categories. So in a place accessible or visible to the public, so in public, concerned with or affecting the community or individual, so the public interest, maintained for or used by the community or individual, public place, and paid for by the public, publicly funded. So this is just a working definition, which is one of the most useful ones that I have found by Cartier and Williams in their book, The Practice of Public Art. So in case if your university would be interested in obtaining one book in English, this might be the one. So you get a quite concrete understanding of the international perspective of public art today. But now let's go more into the questions of how to study public art. And I'm absolutely thrilled that in Indonesia now you have a public art archive. It is, I'm sure some of you have already heard about this one, but just to share the good news that it is the first digital archive on Indonesian public art. It's launched in the end of the last year. Actually, it looks fascinating. And as they write in English on their website, Indonesian Public Art Archive seeks to map, record, and document the data and conceived meaning of as many public artworks as possible in Indonesia. This is a wonderful project, and I really hope that this will work out. And of course, not just recording them, they also aim to build a platform for discussions and knowledge exchanges about the growth of Indonesia's public art. So this is perhaps something that if you and your students are interested in public art in Indonesia, maybe you might get involved in some ways. Maybe just something, food for your thoughts to think about. And of course, so in practice, when we speak about how to study the public art, So this kind of mapping, categorization, and documentation, that's the key. That's where we start. And we have to kind of pin down what's happening in the city around us, or maybe in a neighborhood. I know Jakarta is huge, so take a smaller area of the neighborhood and start mapping and just pinning down what's happening, what kind of artworks you can see and find around you. And of course, this visual analysis, as an art historian, I can't emphasize enough how we have to look into the details, the materials, the size, the position, the symbolic meanings, what kind of figures are displayed, etc., etc. All the details. So like this, of course, urban knitting, it's based on knitting. It works on yarn. It's very soft. It's kind of delightful in itself because of the material. So of course, if this would be done with something else like paper or a mass or something, it didn't have the same feeling. So even the material is very important to take into account how it affects the artwork, the reading of the artwork. And I can't emphasize enough about the on-site observations. So besides just reading and checking what's going online, one really needs to go and see the artworks, because the on-site artworks, it's really important for you to see and understand what does the artwork or the art project make you to feel and think. How do you feel when you see the artwork? That's the core of any kind of research and analysis. And of course, how the others react and behave around the artwork. Do they even see it? The problem with public art is that a lot of people don't even look at it because we take it for granted. So do people look at the artwork? Do they stop? Do they admire? Do they take photos? This is very important about the research, how people behave. And of course, this, how does the artwork or the art project relate to its surroundings? Is it really fitting in? Does it disturb you? Does it disturb the people around you? Or does it actually build the community? Does it bring people together, for example, to talk about something that is important for them? So these interrelations are very important, and hence the on-site observations is really the key to researching the public art. So of course, some of you might be very advanced in your studies already. So the next step in studying public art is to understand these larger concepts and contexts, how public art is interrelated. So when you look at public art, you also basically look into public spaces. So it is good to understand what kind of public spaces are around you and how this relates to public sphere, the notion of, for example, social media and the media discussions, and how this all relates to the notion of publicness. So what is the public and what is the role of the public in the public artwork? So all these four key concepts are quite important to start to understand how they all interrelate with each other and form the field of public art in itself. So through looking at the public art, you can really learn to understand about the national narratives and identities, as I briefly touched upon, the notions of city branding. What kind of city image does Jakarta, for example, want to build around you? What kind of urban planning projects you are having? Are they really making Jakarta as a better city? And what about the new possible capital? How would they use art in order to build that one? What kind of image they want to build for the new capital? Of course, privatization of space is a big issue. The shopping malls, the parks, and more areas around you are actually owned by corporations. So what kind of art they want to bring to you? What do they allow you to do? And this, of course, relates to gentrification, because, of course, art is always kind of accused to causing for gentrification in the cities. So whether that happens or not, that's a good question. And of course, a lot of aspects of cultural policies can be understood for public art and through the public art. What is allowed? What is not allowed? What kind of values your government wants to imply through culture? And of course, we can learn a lot about different kind of gender aspects just by looking at what kind of artworks we have around us, what kind of figures do they give, what kind of roles do they display. And also today, more and more artists are actually working on environmental issues. So what kind of sustainability issues are most relevant to your cities today? The pollution, the water, maybe greening the space, are the artists perhaps contributing towards that, etc. And of course, when we look at the global public art scene, there's a lot we can understand from the civil society formation. For example, the social movements, what kind of art they implement when they are on the streets demonstrating against the government. And of course, these questions of multi and transculturality, because we are living in a global world. So is it only the international famous artists who get to do the artwork in your city? Are the locals also promoted and supported at that time when they're doing their artworks, and so on? So I try to be very brief so that we have more time for questions and comments, because as said, I'm just hoping to inspire you to study further. So that said, thank you very much for your kind attention, and please just feel free to ask questions and comments.
Okay, thanks so much, Minna. It's really, really opened my mind. Thank you so much for your presentation. The last one is from Ridwan Kamil. Oh, use your creativity to change your society. Very nice quote, and I think it is somewhere in the city of Bandung.
Yes, I came across it when I was in Bandung, so I couldn't resist of taking a photo of it. I thought it was so nicely said. I'm sorry that I don't know what it is in Bahasa Indonesia, but I'm sure you know it. So
yeah, the meaning is very in Indonesian language, sangat bersemangat ya, that you can change your society with your creativity. This is really a nice quote for him. Thanks so much. I have a number of questions myself. I have a number of questions myself. I'm sure later on, feel free to drop us question in the chat, or feel free to raise your hands. Anyone want to ask question? I'm intrigued by actually definition of, let's say, public art, because when you present, actually, there is a kind of public art, let's say, supposed to be, of course, in the public space, and then public interest, and then maintained or used by community, and then paid by the public. Public means here government, right? Or what? So the meaning of public, I know because I'm learning about philanthropy or charity. How does public arts or monument established by community, the money is from community, it's not from the state, let's say. It looks like, does it also include as a public art? And also the question about, still in the definition, definition about what the materials can we regard it, let's say, as a public art. If it is intended to, like monuments is established by plan, right? Intended by, let's say, community or by state or government. How about like people or use like debris, let's say debris, you know, yeah, in 2004 we had unfortunately in Aceh tsunami, right? And there was a huge tank ship stranded there, and then somehow before the government take over to make it a museum, actually, but people already make it as like a public art, like a museum, which is something like unintendedly, but I mean, not really created by top up by the government. How about something like a natural, like debris, like which is not really made by an artist? Let's say, how can we define it also as in a public art? It is like, yeah, I know this strange question. Before we get many other questions from others.
Thank you very much indeed. I didn't see any questions in the chat yet, so shall I just start with this? Amelia, would that be fine?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much. Indeed. This is very much debated, the question, of course, what is public art and what is public in the public art? It is because today we don't have that much time. I opted for this one definition that might be quite useful as a starting point to go further on. I don't fully agree with Cartier and Willis because this gets a little bit blurred and a little bit too broad. But the problem today is that with the artist, there's a lot of tendency to think everything is art, especially among the artists. So it makes researchers' life very difficult because we prefer having closer definitions than just saying that everything is art. So having said that, this is a starting point with the notion of what public art could be. And it is a very important observation that you made, that in today's world, a lot of different communities are building monuments and statues and engaging with public art projects. So the notion of the commissioning agency is actually broadening up a lot. So when it was like 100 years ago, it was only by the government. But in today's world, that is not possible anymore. So that's why we have to kind of also adopt and accept that there's a huge amount of public art which is now made by non-governmental initiatives. And personally, I don't see that would be any problem. I think it makes it more interesting. It makes it more complicated for us to, of course, to follow and understand. But if we look at what the government is commissioning and what the communities are commissioning, we can then understand the dialogues that are going on in the society, how closely the governmental initiatives corresponds to the ones that the people are making. And of course, if you think about Indonesian history, there's of course a lot going on in the 50s and 60s in terms of art that was already bottom up. But whether that always appeared in the public space, that is another question. So art is a very, very useful method to voicing your opinions in the society. So I would personally count this kind of community or individual made commissions as public art. It's just a bit of different agency. And of course, the question of maintenance is very important. So if the people don't appreciate, if they don't feel that they own the artwork, they won't maintain it. They might even destroy it just by not caring about it. And this is perhaps the problem with the government initiatives, that it's just like in Hong Kong, the people say it's just put in. It's just put in here and there, and they don't even ask the people. So of course the people don't care. And then the artwork gets, deteriorated if it's not very well made. And so that connection, building that ownership of the artwork might be very important, especially in the future, to see how it works out. And thank you for bringing up the example from Aceh. And first of all, there is also a genre of art called junk art.
Oh. Junk art.
So yeah, so if you Google in English with junk art, you find a lot of artists since the 50s and 60s, they actually use rubbish to do artworks. Especially in environmental issues, it's also a used method nowadays that there are artists who gather the rubbish from the beaches, and then they make that into an artwork to make people to realize how much plastic and how much rubbish we actually have in the sea. So what you were talking about is not junk art, but I just wanted to bring out that there is this tendency. So this kind of natural debris. So it is often debated whether a thing which is, or item which is not meant, which is not done by a human being as an artwork, does it count as an artwork? So if it's just by the nature, personally, I would not call it as an artwork. But I'm not saying that it doesn't have some other values in it. So I can see how important it is for local people to have this kind of site in order to remember and handle this huge catastrophe. And they don't need a human-made artwork to do so. So in here, I would just like to emphasize that art is not always the best solution. So of course, people might approach these different issues through non-artistic way, and that might be even more valuable than an artwork. I hope I'm clear enough. It's just that we don't always have to build a monument. We don't always have to make an artwork. We could let something organically emerge in the community, what they think it's valuable, and whether that's art or not, we don't have to necessarily care about that. So I wouldn't necessarily call it as a public art, but that doesn't make a difference to its importance.
Okay. And there is a question from Fabria, whether there is difference between public art and art in public places. I think it's somehow you already mentioned about this.
Mm-hmm. So in English, especially like in UK, they do speak about public art collections. And these public art collections are in the museums.
Okay.
So in English, sometimes people also understand that especially like a national museum, government-owned museum, it's also made with public funds and it has a kind of public art collection. So that's a kind of a subcategory of public art in itself. But personally, I prefer that we try to be a little bit more focused, and we would kind of accept, for example, Cartier and Willis' suggestion at this point that this is outside of the museums and galleries. This is something that you can accidentally come across when you do your shopping or when you are doing your daily life tasks around your city, that you don't plan to see the artwork necessarily. You can come across about it.
Okay.
That's the moment of surprise is actually quite strong indicator on how we feel and how we see. So if we already go into the museum, we go with the mindset that we want to see art. But if we just come across an artwork in the public art space in the urban city, we just, we might be so surprised that it kind of pushes our thinking into a new direction because we didn't expect that it would happen.
Okay, cool. I am very happy that you mentioned a lot of ideas how to study public arts, whether you use it as a mapping, categorization, and also to observe how people react to certain public arts. And I'm glad you also give an example of the statue of the Queen, and it's remind us about many statues in Indonesia, and some historians also learn about the transformation of society, including Indonesia, through the monuments. And as you say, some monuments are sometimes destroyed. It means people do not really want to have such kind of history, let's say. History. Yes. And it's really interesting that we can also we can study about gender from monuments to gender aspect. I'm really happy. I will invite some of my students who actually learning about national narratives and also civil society. Any of you wanted to ask something? Anyone? This is very actually expensive to have Mina talk here. Expensive moment. Any of you? Maybe Tri, Ramadan, or yeah, or maybe Mina, you can comment on my.
Yes, of course. So for example, if we look into the gender aspects for a moment, so of course it is very important to first see how many female artists you have actually that have been doing public artwork, who have been commissioned to do public artwork. So I think you might know Dolorosa Sinaga. So she's one of the very famous Indonesian female artists. She's very famous for her female artworks, also internationally. And she has at least, if I'm not mistaken, one public artwork in Jakarta. It's called the Monument 66. It just has the number 66 to draw the attention and remind you about the year 66 and what happened and how the students were involved in that. So it's a very, in a way, a subtle monument itself. It just gives you the year. It doesn't tell you anything else, but it's made by a female artist in itself. So this is also one of these aspects to take into account, like what kind of and how many artworks, public artworks, female artists are allowed to do or commissioned to do, and what kind of visual language they use. So female artist is not always just doing female figures. So we don't have to expect that the work is always about female figures, even with Dolorosa, although she's famous for them. So if we look into the gender, so of course the gender in terms of the artist, the agency, then if there is a gender aspect in the artwork in itself, if there is a female figure, for example, that's also very important. And then of course, what kind of female figure it is, because quite often, like in the statue of the Heroes Monument, the leading figure is a male figure.
Yeah.
The female figure is a supporting figure.
Mm.
So in socialist realism, especially in the Soviet Union, we start to get very strong female figures, that there is perhaps even a group of people that is led by a woman.
Mm.
So, but then you have to be careful if it's only a group of female figures.
Mm.
So if the female figure is actually leading a group of men and women, or women only.
Yeah.
So how much power is given to women? What kind of social role they are given in an artwork? So these kind of tendencies might be something to look into.
Yeah.
From the gender aspect.
Okay.
And if I may spend a minute about the idea of destruction of the artworks.
Yeah, please.
So one of the most important or most well-known example is of course the statues of Stalin and Lenin.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of them, dozens and hundreds of those statues around the world. So when the politics changed, a lot of them were pulled down.
Yeah.
And then it was a big question, what can you do with those statues? Should you put them into a museum? Should you preserve them somewhere? Could you just destroy them? Because of course, for some people, it's very uncomfortable idea to destroy an image of a leader. So if you Google, you find a kind of park of Stalin. So there is a person who actually collected quite a huge amount of those statues, and they are in one park where people are allowed to still see them, and the kids can even play over them.
Mm.
So you can go and still study the history, but it's not venerated and honored in any single way. It's just left there for people to study.
Yeah.
And of course, I can send you the name a little bit later, but it's because I'm still sharing. I can't Google at the same time. Let me see if I can make it work. Can't remember it from the top of my
Yeah, no problem. It's really interesting. It shows there is a community, society change, and then something that a long time ago regarded as very valuable, as heroes, and then becoming not hero anymore or not valuable.
So I don't know if you have had a chance to look into the Black Lives Matter movement and how it has been developing, because of the Black Lives Matter movement and these questions of racial issues, a lot of statues in US and in UK have actually been pulled down, painted over, destroyed, replaced. So these kind of actions are very, very popular during the 2020, just last year. It's easy to find examples, and this really tells how the Western world is now trying to change. I don't say it's really changing, but it's trying to change.
Okay, interesting. I'm still opening chance if any one of you want to ask, because I get message if somebody want to ask question. Anyone? Oh, okay.
I know this is a huge topic and there's a lot of information today, so it can be a bit overwhelming too.
There is a question.
Lovely.
From Farhan, candidate of student from NTU or NUS.
Oh, lovely.
Would architecture and urban infrastructure fall under the definition of public art? Example, Singapore's Garden by the Bay, and if yes, what countries or cities in Asia are seen as model for sustainable urban development?
Thank you, Farhan, for that question. It's a very important one. Different disciplines see this issue a little bit differently. They have different take on it. So of course, if you ask from an architect, for them, architecture and how the urban infrastructure is built is kind of like, that is the platform where public art emerges. So it's not the same thing. They kind of take the same tangible space, but the architectural features, the architectural aesthetics is in a way more important. That's the basic setting where the public art is included.
Okay.
So of course, a lot of architectural buildings use decorations and artwork already like hundreds of years ago. Traditionally, you have carcoys and etc. in buildings. You have fountains, etc. coming up. But it is more or less now in the 21st century that, for example, a mall is very concerned about having public artwork outside of the mall or inside of the mall in order to make it more appealing for the people. So no, public art does not include architecture and urban infrastructure per se, but it's other way around. And the Singapore Garden, yes, of course, Singapore in itself is promoting the whole area as a kind of artistic area, but it's not exactly seen that way from the Western perspective. So of course, there's a lot of discussion, what is art and how we see it in the Asia and how we see it in the West. There's a differences in that. But of course, the sustainable urban development in itself, it's the most crucial topic we have today in all around the world. And a lot of architects and artists and governments are working towards it. So it's a kind of like the collaborative effort in several cities to bring people together to understand that now we have to do something. And of course, Singapore is one of the established cities in Asia to be known about the sustainability efforts, what they have, the green space, etc., etc. Of course, Tokyo is another one, very famous for a very long-term engagement. And I would say Taipei is also have been doing a great job for, I think, from the 90s already, if I'm not mistaken. So quite a few cities are doing a lot. And of course, like a lot of cities in China have made a great improvement compared to what they were 20 or 30 years ago. But usually it's mainly like Taipei, Singapore, Tokyo is kind of like, if we think about like urban gardening and how the green space is taking into the urban infrastructure, those three cities might be something to look into. I hope, Farhan, that this answers your question.
Yes, I think so. Thanks so much for your answer and insight. I believe some of my students, because I got the message in our group, students group, and saying that, oh, it's very interesting, and comments, and maybe they are not really confident to use the English, but it's okay. I have a number of questions, but I don't think it is time allowed for that. But to me, if I can wrap up this discussion, I think the area of public art is really one potential area for a historian to study and to use resources, resources from what we've seen in the public as the resources, because some of the students always complaining, oh, I couldn't get any sources, I couldn't get documents when they want to write about history. But now look, you can use the public art actually as a sources for your study, to learn about society, to learn about the past and present society. And also, I think the art, I think you mentioned Suzanne saying that art should connect people, right? I think that's really nice quote. Well, art also connect us, you, all the participants here. I'm really thankful you of your presentation and willingness to share here for your time. Thanks so much on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and also participant. Thank you, Nina, for your time. And I will give now the time to Febria again.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Amelia, and thank you very much to Dr. Romina Faljaka for the presentations and explanations about public art. So it's very, very interesting. So public arts, I think it's like, you know, a critical tool, yeah, for telling and retelling our stories. And then it is a practice that can help us uncover, challenge, and witness true public narratives. It's wonderful. Thank you very much. So guys, okay, before we close our discussion, so I would like to remind you again to fill your attendance, fill up your attendance to the link that has been sent to the chat column, ya. Silakan Bapak Ibu mengisi daftar hadir, attendance ya, kehadiran melalui link yang sudah disampaikan oleh panitia, yang sudah diberikan panitia. Atau mungkin saya boleh kirim ulang lagi ya. Ya, baik Bapak Ibu sekalian, terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much for joining this discussion, and then please stay tuned. We are going to hold another discussion, inshallah, next month with special guests and within or outside our country. So it's a surprise for you all. So I hope it is what we have learned together here can be beneficial for us, and then can support and then strengthen and then broaden our insights and horizons. Okay, so I think that's all for today, and let's close our discussion by reciting Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. So that's all for today, and see you next to the next Open Minds discussions. Goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
May I, if you want to share the slides with your students as like handouts? Yes. I'm sorry that I didn't say that earlier, so because I know English might be a question. So
yeah. I can share your slide to my students or here. I think some of them are still here. You want to share it now?
May I suggest that you make it into a PDF?
Okay, sure. I will.
So it's just that, as you can imagine, some of the images have copyrights.
Sure.
Yes, so if it's in a PDF, then it's more convenient to share. So this is nothing personal, and I'm sure you have wonderful students. It's just a practice of doing it so that.
I will make it into PDF and send to the students and participants attended today. Okay, thank you, Mina, and everyone.
much. Thank you for your patience. I hope I hope I didn't pour in too much.
No. Oh, Ibu Linda, warm regards from all of us at Koalisi Seni.
Yes, I noticed. That's so wonderful that she was here too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, lovely, very lovely to see you, Amelia, and thank you for the invitation and the patience. It's been an interesting spring for all of us, so I'm happy to see that you are so well.
Yeah, I'm happy to see you also well. Keep safe. Keep
Same
healthy.
thing. Until we meet again.
We meet again somewhere, sometime after the pandemic.
Yes, and thank you, Febria, for taking care of everything so patiently. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Dr. Mina. Okay.
See you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, all. I will close the Zoom ya. Ibu